So thank you everyone for joining us and welcome to today's event on accelerating action for detained refugee women, marking International Women's Day. My name is Wutsia Stremska and I am the Communications Manager at René Cassin, leading our work to promote a compassionate asylum system in the UK. René Cassin works to promote and protect universal rights, drawing on Jewish experience and Jewish values. We work within the Jewish community by building support for human rights values amongst British Jews and in the wider community by bringing the authority of a British perspective, of a Jewish perspective on issues that resonate with Jewish experiences. On this International Women's Day, we are reminded that the only way to enjoy human rights fully is through the complete realization of women's rights. And this is true for women in wider society, as it is for women from the most marginalized groups in our society as well. In today's UK, not all women fully enjoy their human rights, and most women seeking asylum in the UK are survivors of rape and other forms of gender-based violence. Too many women of these women experience anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicidal ideation. These are intensified by the UK's current immigration detention system, which is extremely harmful to refugees, especially women and children, impacting their physical and mental well-being. This is currently no time limit for immigration detention in the UK, and refugees are often locked up for weeks and months on end with no idea when they will be released. This is not an experience unfamiliar to members of the Jewish community, as in the 1940s, tens of thousands of Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi Europe were classified as enemy aliens and placed into internment camps in the UK, including those who had been found by a tribunal to be genuine refugees fleeing persecution. And approximately 3,500 of these internees were women and children. And by August 1940, nearly 87 years ago, public opinion has swung sharply against internment, and the UK government of the time started to reverse its policy. So today I'm delighted to introduce our excellent panel of speakers for this evening who will explore the personal challenges faced by women within a difficult and unjust system. So we're going to start with Meryl O'Rourke, who is primarily a professional stand-up comedian, comic and TV gag writer who recently wrote her first dramatic play, Thrown by Giants, about her mother's time in the 1940s, interested on the Isle of Man. And Meryl won the Betty and Peter Sitcom Prize in 2016 and was the Young Vic neighborhood voice for 2022 and is an Arts Depot and Jewish Friends resident in 2024. Thrown by Giants is her second piece of writing about her mother's escape from the Holocaust. Her solo show comedy, Bad Mother, about living with the resulting PTSD, received a 5-star review and was praised by the Jewish Chronicle for crashing through the debate on whether the Holocaust is a topic of comedy. So I'll pass over to Meryl. You're still muted, Meryl.
And what I was saying while I was muted is I'm not used to doing talks like this. So thank you very much for inviting me. I might be a bit of a klutz because I'm not used to it. That's the thing. Yeah, my name is Meryl O'Rourke. I'm very flattered to be asked by René Cassin to speak to you about my mother's experience in early refugee detention and my play on this, Thrown by Giants. And I think I'll start with, see if I can share the photograph that inspired my play. These are some of the women in the refugee detention camp in 1940. So that'll help me illustrate who some of these people are. My mother, this is my mother down here. She was detained in 1940 by the Churchill government, aged 5, in the Isle of Man women's internment camp. She was a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany, and she was detained with her mother here and her little brother in a hotel, along with dozens of strangers. These would have only been a small selection of the women in the hotel. Commonly, they were made to share rooms, so it was very crowded. Her father, my grandfather, was detained in a men's camp, which one of my play characters longingly describes as exactly 22 kilometers away. It's been quite hard to know where to start because when I try talking about the camp, so very little is known about it. It can get quite confusing explaining it to people, though, of course, Ukia has already given you a brief outline. I suppose the title of this talk, Accelerating Action, I think the key points that makes me think of is that when we speak about current hotel detention, it is always talked about as if it is some kind of emergency measure, that we don't know what to do with a sudden influx of refugees, so we just shove them in a hotel. This is not new in any way. This is an 80-year policy. So it's easiest to illustrate how detention felt for these women by going back a little bit, if you allow me to. On Kristallnacht in 1939, the German police forced their way into my family's flat. Their shop below had been destroyed and all of the stock thrown onto bonfires. They dragged my mum, then aged 3, and her little brother out of their beds. It was the middle of the night, and the beds and the toys were also thrown onto the bonfire. My grandfather resisted arrest and tried to reason with the police to make him go to Dachau concentration camp, which is where they took the men on that evening. They held my mother out of the 5th floor window of their flat over the bonfire and told the family that she would go onto the bonfire if he didn't come peacefully. My grandmother was instructed also to secure his release by arranging voluntary deportation. Now, this was an initial Nazi plan. Those initial men who were arrested were told to voluntarily leave. It's thought now that this was so the Nazi government could claim that they had given Jews fair warning to leave before the borders close. So often it can confuse people that my grandfather went into Dachau but then came back out again. My grandmother's cousin had already fled to Britain after a murder of an uncle in 1937, so she was contacted. The British government required £200 to accept a family of 4 German Jews. That is the equivalent of £32,000, which back then and pretty much now is a year's and a half wages, which they had no way of accessing. German Jews had not been allowed employment for almost 7 years at this point, and independent traders like my family had had all of their assets destroyed or confiscated. So I stress to you, the UK government required a year and a half wages from a group of people who had no way of accessing that. My grandmother's cousin dropped out of university to fundraise permanently. She started with her university fees and then contacted a lot of friends. This, of course, meant that she gave up her own future in doing that. She never attended university, never got a career. On discovering that the British wouldn't allow my grandparents to bring their children with them, as both were required to work as live-in domestic servants, she then fundraised further to require boarding school places for my mum and uncle, so they wouldn't be adopted or left behind in Germany. 4 bonds were secured, which was an amazing gift, but that gift also felt like a curse for my grandmother. She lived with her 2 children, but also with her 2 parents. So with 4 bonds, she had to make a very difficult choice. My grandfather was released from Dachau. He was given a vitamin injection. He swiftly developed tuberculosis, and it's now thought that these injections were a Nazi attempt at sending human weapons to Britain. So they were met by the Red Cross, and they came over to Britain with the Red Cross. As Yukia has pointed out, they were very much verified as refugees who had suffered terrible things. But of course, they were separated once again to their work placements and to boarding school. One weekend, they reunited for a seaside trip on the Kent coast, at which the little children were arrested for speaking German. The local Kent press speculated that the playful shouts may have been calling to U-boats, which increased public fear of the happiness and relief refugees so desperately want to celebrate. So yes, a 5-year-old and 4-year-old were arrested by the British police. This was during 5 months of parliamentary debate on what to do with the 70,000 various Germans living in Britain. The Home Office originally decided to only detain male Nazi sympathisers, but that received a huge pushback from the British press. They reported lies that there were 4 million Germans here without papers. The British press reported that the female Jews who wore wigs with shaved heads underneath were in fact men in disguise and were handing out poison sweets, something which you may recognise from Roald Dahl's book The Witches, which he completely stole for his plot. Thousands of the new domestic workers, mainly women, were sacked, either because the gentry were Nazi sympathisers, or they were scared that these German servants suddenly in their house were actually spying on them, listening to phone calls. This sparked a domino effect of mass female homelessness, which of course then led to sex work. And then this sudden uptick of German street workers fueled the patriarchal obsession of sex worker as manipulative spy, until the point where eventually King George himself requested that the women be detained along with the men. Now, I should point out it's not unreasonable to fear spies during World War II. We've all seen the films. But Nazi ethics did not allow women to do war work. It's actually one of the reasons they lost. And Churchill knew this. Churchill knew that women weren't involved in the Nazi war effort. 30,000 people, including 4,000 women, were transported to the Isle of Man, mainly Jewish refugees, but some everyday Germans and quite a lot of Nazi sympathisers. They were all housed together. There were old World War I barracks for the men, but no facilities for the women on the island. So an entire seaside resort was requisitioned, Port Erin. When I originally found this photograph, it said Erin on it, and I spent a lot of time thinking that one of the women here was called Erin until I realised what it actually was. So them having been arrested, by the way, meant that the British public, a lot of the British public, thought that the refugees were actually Nazis, and the people of Liverpool turned out in droves to spit on them as the detainees were being forced onto boats. Now, the whole reason for rationing during World War II was it was too dangerous to import and export food via boat. So we are in a situation where that was too dangerous for food, but all right for refugees. As one of my characters say, they don't even send cheese across that sea. On arrival, my mother watched her dad being taken away from her yet again to a camp. For those just released from Dachau, this was terrifying. Actual Nazis were housed alongside the Jews. The men had fistfights, so were separated. But the authorities didn't seem to notice the Nazi women as they used quiet violence. They poisoned food, they stole keepsakes, and pretended Germany had won the war and would be arriving imminently. That was very common. Now, one reason I've told this entire backstory is I have spent my entire life being told it was different back then. Oh, it was different back then. We knew what was happening. The Jewish refugees behaved differently. We were kinder to them. None of this is true. My family arrived in boats, paying thousands on dangerous seas. They were sick. They were penniless. They were traumatized. I'm sorry, my son's alarm is going off. Apologies for that. When they arrived, they were unwanted and reviled. Britain only took 10% of applicants. And a lot of these refugees only chose Britain because that's where their relatives happened to be, where the funding came from. One of the myths that we are all rich partly comes from having to have friends who had a year's spare wages lying about to save us. The poor Jews died in concentration camps. Children were preferred unaccompanied, no matter the effect on their sanity. When people boggle at the concept of tiny children being arrested on a Kent beach, I point out that Nigel Farage has commonly live streamed migrant children arriving in Dover. None of this is new. This is 80 years of standard practice. Now, there were notable positive differences. They were allowed to play on the beaches. All their food and their healthcare was free. The food was surplus as it couldn't be exported. So the small money they earned in camp could be spent on happiness rather than survival. And my mother did describe her time as blissful. Even though we need to take into account her PTSD, as an adult, she had completely normalized the fact that people she loved would be taken away from her violently. Her main therapy was using that bit of money to go to the cinema, where she became obsessed with Carmen Miranda, who was a foreign-speaking dark-haired woman who would dance in glitter, was hugely celebrated. She watched Arthur Askey and George Formby ridiculing Hitler. When I saw Robert Jenrick painting over the murals to welcome migrant children, I realised how important those murals were for those children, because I saw the same Mickey Mouse who taught my mum English and taught my mum fun. My grandfather was given hospital treatment for his TB, which unwittingly defeated a Nazi war weapon. And I'm sure we know that even in modern warfare, the use of refugees to destabilize countries' health systems is known. It's one of the reasons we have Russian propaganda about that on our social media. What I want the world to learn from my mother's happiness is she gave back. She said her whole life, I love England because England wanted me. She devoted 40 years to local government. She developed children's libraries, and my uncle is still working for BP at the age of 89. BP are problematic, but in his mind, he's still working for a British company. My play has many other stories. There were women who took their own lives, forced away from home, housed next to towering cliffs without any thought of how that would affect their mental health. The unaccompanied minors from my family are given their voice in my play, as all of whom were physically and sexually abused by unchecked foster placements. The torture of my grandmother and others of knowing about the loved ones left behind, imminently to be murdered, with zero power or funds whilst in detention to save them. I mentioned the myth that we had open passage to Israel, where in fact the British arrested the Jews arriving there. Some refugees were actually arrested by the British more often than by the Nazis. I tell stories of Black, gay and disabled victims of Nazism as well. And I hope that what my play is about is how much we as humans can bear to lose before our own survival becomes worthless to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meryl. That was really interesting to hear. And I've made them like other people as well. I've not heard of a few of those things. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Up next will be Reem Assil, who is a British Syrian born in London and grew up in Damascus is part of the Freedom from Torture's One Strong Voice Coalition. Reem holds an MSc in biotechnology, and prior to joining Freedom from Torture, she worked as a chief biomedical technician in the cardiovascular development at the University of Cambridge before embarking on her second PhD in identity studies and peace building at the University of Winchester between 2016 and 2019. She holds a certificate in business and social justice from the University of Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership, a certificate in embodied conflict resolution, and a certificate in working with somatic wounds, a certificate in investigation somatic trauma therapy, and mind-body coaching. And that's what Reem's going to be telling us more about. So over to you, Reem.
Thank you so much, Lucia, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight, and thank you, Meryl, as well. It's going to be hard, to follow up after you. As you mentioned, Lucia, I had, I think from that little bio is clear, I had a very, if you will, like roller coaster like life story. I was born in the UK, so I was born British. However, my family went back to Syria, and I grew up there. And 15 years ago or 14 years ago, I survived torture by the state in Syria, arbitrary detention, investigation, threatening, and a travel ban. Luckily for me, I had a second home, which is the UK, to come back to. However, when I arrived in the UK, I was a wreck of a human. I was diagnosed with acute chronic depression, anxiety, PTSD. I was a single mom. My body also collapsed. At that time, my nervous system couldn't take anymore, and I was in a suicidal state. It was very, very difficult, to be honest, to survive without having to claim asylum or go through detention and the asylum and the refugee and migration system here in the UK. I have a background in activism, and quickly I became very aware of the inequities that we face as human beings when it comes to access to safety, and especially as women. So, and I'm really glad that we are convening tonight, as women, to talk about our issues and our hopes and our struggles, and reimagine, redream up a future together. And I think the first point here is to go on that journey is to emphasize that whatever we hear when it comes to refugees, asylum seekers, are not just numbers, and stats in policies. These are human beings with dreams, histories, and struggles. I just told you a little bit about my story in a few seconds. However, I'm sure every one of us here will have a plethora of stories about challenges that we faced in life, and about, moments of disappointments, moments of fear, and so on and so forth. But we don't get to hear that when it comes to the discourse, the public discourse around refugees and asylum seekers. And I will be highlighting on a few points. As you mentioned, my work at the moment revolves around bringing trauma-informed, anti-oppressive practices into the sector. So the first thing probably to unpick here tonight is the systemic harms and the policy failures that the UK's hostile environment when it comes to policies display and therefore disproportionately harm women seeking asylum. So when we look at, for example, at detention centers, we see that they replicate and exacerbate violence with reports, of gender-based violence, but also medical neglect, indefinite confinement. I volunteer with, with the Cambridgeshire police on a community scrutiny panel. And one panel I cannot attend is the detention panel, to be honest, because I cannot bear, I cannot see the detention centers. And we're not talking here refugees, we're talking like normal, people that are stopped by the police. But it's so traumatizing. And I think those who who manage the centers and therefore the humans that go through these centers do not realize that. And the policies often also ignore the trauma that these people, many of these women, actually arrive in the UK carrying. And I know that you will hear from Agnes in a moment, but having experienced conflict, gender-based persecution, trafficking sometimes, even women that endured trafficking still are criminalized. Oh, the policies and the structure at the moment criminalizes, the women seeking asylum rather than supporting them. And we use the term women here as an umbrella term. However, it's also important to employ an intersectional feminist lens when we analyze these experiences and we unpack them and we try to understand them more. So because gender oppression intersects with racism, classism, xenophobia, and all of that make asylum seeking women more particularly vulnerable. And something probably that springs to mind immediately is the experience of Black and brown women in the detention centers, LGBTQ plus, asylum seekers as well, trans women, disabled women, you name it, survivor of, again, gender-based violence. These people arrive in a very vulnerable state and they face compounded risks in detention centers. Plus the policies and the system that they have to go through, which uphold, unfortunately, at the moment, colonial power structures by controlling and dehumanizing, especially in particular, racialized migrants and racialized women migrants are, more often than not, completely absent from the public discourse. To move forward, I think we need to advocate more for trauma-informed and anti-oppressive practices. And I'll talk about, in a bit about reform versus, abolition. But if we are to employ like a reform lens at the moment, we need actually to recognize the lived trauma that women seeking asylum arrive with here in the UK. So we need to prioritize their psychological safety and center the voices of the survivors of torture and persecution, and trauma in policy reform. And to adopt a more anti-oppressive approach, we need to move beyond inclusion and doing it in a tokenistic way towards co-creating actually these policies with those directly impacted. And we're seeing more of that, not, not to the level that we actually need to really make this sector less hostile and more supporting for traumatized individuals. And I mentioned, the reform versus abolition. I'm probably personally pro-abolitionist approach. So what I would like to see ultimately happening is ending detention altogether. Not only reforming it, but I accept that probably we need to, accumulate small gains towards arriving at that point. But it's worthwhile, I think, putting it there in the space tonight as we are here, and hopefully this is a safe space for us to not only share our personal experiences, but as I said in the beginning, to reimagine and dream up a future together. My dream would be to end detention altogether. And I think this is the only actually really, truly trauma-informed solution, to be honest, and to expand community-based alternatives, rather than using these detention centers and which has been there for, as we heard from Meryl, for decades and targeted different groups of people over the history of Britain. So what can we do today? I think we need to advocate for policy change, as I said, demand an end to policies that dehumanize women in detention centers, and invest in high-based alternatives, start co-creating these policies with the women, with the survivors themselves. And we also have some actions that we can collectively start working towards. We can start probably challenging, which we're doing, challenging narratives that justify detention, and instead work in solidarity with grassroots migrant justice movements, as I said, bringing community-based approach. We can reaffirm our lived experiences. And yes, no one should have to seek safety only to be imprisoned. Going back to my personal story, it was hard enough to just stay alive without having to endure and undergo the asylum system and detention center. I cannot actually imagine how women who more often than not actually endure more than I did will have then, when they think they reached safety, will have to go through renewed episodes and cycles of trauma. So yeah, and I'm also pro action on different levels. Yes, we need to advocate policies and policymakers and lobby on that level, but also we always have something to do on our grassroots levels, convening people together, and co-creating solutions that stem from a community-based approach. Sorry, and I emphasize we need to center the voices of those who survive the trauma more than anyone else. Yeah, I'll keep it at that tonight. Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
so much, Reem. That was so much food for thought. And like you said, trauma informed is quite an interesting approach to look at, but also the community-based alternatives that I know Women for Refugee Women and Jesuit Refugee Services and us also are campaigning for. So moving on, I'd like to welcome Agnes Tanoa, who is the spokesperson facilitator at Women for Refugee Women and a powerful campaigner and advocate. Agnes has regularly spoken to the mass media, at events, to Parliament, and at protests against the cruel practice of immigration detention, motivated by her own personal experience of being detained while seeking safety in the UK. Agnes now supports other women to build their skills and confidence to speak out and campaign for change. So I'll pass it over to you, Agnes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Sorry for my English. I hope you will understand what I mean. But when I heard the previous friends from Mary, I know that the fight will be hard. The fight will be hard. And when I listened to Reem, I see hope because we don't want to stop. I'm Agnes Tano. I'm from Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. I'm coming to tell my experience of detention, but I came here in 2011. I was the personal assistant of the First Lady of my country. At that time, I have also a high profile in my political party, so I didn't need to seek asylum. But when a civil war broke in my country, I have to flee. I was in prison there. I was released with the help of United Army, but I cannot stay there because I saw my colleague and friend killed, taken to prison. So I have to leave the country. I have to leave the country. I don't have somewhere to go if it was not in the UK, because years before I sent my children studying here. So my sole family, my only family here was my two children, my daughter and my boy here. So I came expecting safety, expect sanctuary. And when I get in the process of seeking asylum, I have to report weekly in Dallas Court in Manchester. And one day when I went to report as my regular appointment, I was arrested and I was detained. When I was arrested, I don't know where they were taking me with my little English. They took my phone from me. I cannot call anyone. I was isolated in the van until the final destination, that is Yazoo Detention Center. Once I arrived there, I realized that is a prison, Yazoo Detention Center. It caused breakdown in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking, why did they arrest me? What is going to happen to me? I cannot sleep. It was very stressful, damaging, breaks your mental health. When I was coming, I was expecting protection and sanctuary, but instead I found myself in detention. What was really hard for me. I'm still feel emotional, sorry, when I talk about this experience, because I have experienced detention, as I said before, and it was really traumatizing to find myself again in Yazoo Detention Center. This is why I'm campaigning. This is why I'm a spokesperson. Because I don't want anyone to go through what I want through. For me, it's very hard, awful. As I said, I needed protection, but I find myself in a prison, being locked up. It's not right for me. It's not right. I think it's unjust. As Rim said, we are not number, we are women. We are human beings, we are women, we are mother, we are friends. And when they put you in detention, you are isolated from all people that you can get in connection. Is why I campaign against detention, and I will do until something happens or until I leave this world. And I think I'm a good place. The good place for me is women for refugee women. They want to end detention. They want the government to listen to us, to hear us, to reflect on our feeling, to see what women detained go through and make a change. As I will repeat, copy Remy, we are not number, we are human beings. So Women for Refugee Women and I, we cried loud. Detention is so harmful. It caused so much pain. I wish the government hear our cry, treat us like human beings, and then make some change. I think refugee for women refugee decide this campaign, since 2014 that I heard from them. And they did that based on the previous research that they launched the campaign Set Her Free. Women for Refugee Women saw the sorrow of the women in detention. At that time, there were even children in detention, pregnant lady in detention. They saw the sorrow of those women who are looking for compassion. We are looking for compassion. I'm not going to talk a lot, but we want, as Rem say, that we have this ally or this group, this, I don't know how you say it in English, but to be together, because unity is strength. And together, if we fight together, we will achieve something. And based on the truth. So the next, how we call it, the next research of that will be the report of the research of women for refugee women, who will be launched next week. Went through a lot of experience of women that spoke to women with lived experience, and they have how you say it, but the figures that show how detention harm people, how detention harm people, how oh Seigneur Jesus. The report shows that detention has a huge negative impact on women's mental health and well-being. And that is a huge gap between what Home Office say, what this country that is a human right country practice. There is a big gap. We should stand together. We should stand together for women, for refugee women. For now, what we ask to our allies, to people like you that know, how you say it, but the struggle of women detention, to stand with us. One simple thing to write to your MP, and also in any way that you can help us do it. Maybe simply explaining to your friend what is detention. Share with your with the youth if you have the opportunity to meet a student, but do something, follow us also on our website, on our social media, and we invite you to our future campaign against detention. Yeah, we will stand against detention as we we do for Yazwood and the Woodside Detention Center. We want as is possible to bring a bit of joy to women seeking asylum seeking because they are mothers. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, but as I said, I cannot heal from that, and anytime it's a shame for me to cry behind in front of people. I'm sorry.
No, thank you so much, Agnes. And as everyone else in the comment section is also saying, we're so moved to hear your story, and this is exactly why we're campaigning. So thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing, incredible work and your experience as well. So moving onto this, we're going to hear from Sophie Cartwright, who is the Senior Policy Officer at the Jesuit Refugee Service UK, and where she does policy advocacy and research on the asylum system, immigration detention, and related issues. She's also a research associate at the Centre for Criminology at the University of Oxford, and she previously worked with people seeking asylum in Glasgow. And Sophie's going to talk more about what happens to women post detention. So I'm just going to share your. Feel free to start as I'm sharing yours.
Great. Hi everyone. Thank you so much, and thank you to all the speakers, and thank you so much, Agnes, for sharing what you did. The Jesuit Refugee Service works with people in immigration detention and with people who've been refused asylum and made completely destitute. So this evening, I'll hopefully give some insight into women's experiences of the asylum process and of destitution that comes out of that. Now, in these settings, of course, as we've already heard, women face distinctive challenges. Additionally, as they're battling an unjust and racist system, patriarchy and sexism compound this. As we heard from Reem, they have to fight systemic oppression on multiple levels. Slide. I think for context, nearly all asylum seekers are banned from working and can't access mainstream financial support. While an asylum claim is being considered, people can normally access very basic support and accommodation from the Home Office, though even in this context, people routinely struggle to meet even their most basic needs, and the accommodation provided is run down, it's often unsafe. We've seen specific difficulties for pregnant women and for mothers of young children in asylum accommodation. Last year, we did research with mothers in asylum hotels. We found that often no provision was made for pregnant women. There were often no facilities for babies, like nowhere in your room to sterilize a bottle. And the food was actually so poor that mothers would put their children to bed crying in hunger. So that's asylum accommodation. Now, while living in that context, women are navigating the asylum determination process. And this, as we've already heard, is really hostile. There's a lot of evidence that women are disproportionately impacted by a lens of suspicion in asylum decision-making. A large portion of women seeking asylum, as we've heard, are survivors of sexual or gender-based violence. In fact, most of them. And it can be really, really difficult to disclose details about this, especially in a context that is both hostile and unfamiliar and weird, like an asylum interview is. But if a survivor doesn't disclose her experience immediately, or initially omits details, this can be taken as proof that she's lying. The Nationality and Borders Act actually takes this long-standing problem and makes it worse by raising the standard of proof that's used, and specifically doing this for questions of credibility. That is, specifically doing this when asking, is this person telling the truth? So this further increases the risk of women being interrogated and disbelieved about experiences of sexual violence. And this occurs against a wider background where it's very difficult to get a lawyer. Inevitably, many claims are wrongly refused, where people really badly need protection and they're denied it. Now, if a claim is refused by the Home Office and the courts, all support is cut off, and claimants are evicted from asylum accommodation. This is terrifying. One woman told us, I think we've got hopefully a slide about this. It's a couple of slides back, I think. One woman told us, when you are refused asylum, you have nowhere to go, no family. When it happens to me, I slept on the streets. Also from this point, the chances of being detained increase, though that can happen at any point in the asylum process. And people refused asylum often live in utter destitution for years, either sleeping rough or couch surfing in precarious and unsafe scenarios. Malnutrition and food insecurity are really, really common, and inevitably this has a huge long-term effect on both mental and physical health that people don't get over even when they get out of destitution. Sometimes people cycle between detention and destitution. And women forced into destitution are made especially vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. Many women tell us that when they sleep on the streets, abuse is so common that they've just come to expect it as a matter of routine. Couch surfing, or just trying to find some kind of roof over your head, also places women at high risk of exploitation. As part of recent research, a woman who asked to be known publicly as Joyce explained to us, for women, destitution can be even worse because some men take advantage of them because they're vulnerable. They sometimes end up forcing themselves into relationships they don't want to be in, so they have a roof over their heads. And there's lots of situations like this, lots of situations where women who have nowhere to turn can be abused and exploited, and often that's having fled this before. And then they have nowhere to turn because hostile environment measures that put immigration control right across daily life make it risky for them to seek help from authorities or report crimes. They're really trapped, and the possibility of detention, if they go to the authorities, is hanging over them. Hostile environment measures also bar people from essential services, and crucially, this includes healthcare. So this is the point I want to end on. People refused asylum have to pay for NHS care in England, and sometimes care can just be refused outright, even where it isn't, which is normally because of a decision about its urgency. People get huge bills, and then they get into debt, and information about this debt is shared with the Home Office and counts against them trying to regularise their immigration status. So it traps them even for longer in destitution in this situation. Going to hospital puts people in danger of immigration control. One thing that we've noticed is that this can have a really disastrous impact on pregnant women who can be dissuaded from attending maternity appointments. I think of one pregnant woman we were supporting who received a letter saying that she was chargeable for maternity care. She was so worried about this that she ended up missing appointments. She was afraid of going into debt and of the consequences it would have for her status. The experience was extremely traumatic for her. And of course, there are so many women like her. There's and this can have such a serious, a really devastating impact on health. It can be very dangerous. That's a brief window into what women experience in asylum destitution. While all this is going on, women are often continuing to navigate the asylum process, submitting fresh asylum claims, and being destitute, having nowhere safe to sleep, makes this even more difficult. I know many women who have lived through experiences like these for years, only to finally be recognised as having been refugees all along. I'm often struck by the resilience of the women we work with, by their courage and the hope with which they again rebuild their lives. But they shouldn't need this resilience in a country that is supposed to protect them. We are intentionally making people destitute as a means of immigration control, and this needs to stop. We need to end asylum destitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It's really interesting to see exactly what happens after detention as well, because the fight's not really over. So I'd like to open it up to any questions. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. I think we have time for a couple. But maybe if there aren't any so far, I'll ask my own one first. So it was amazing listening to all of you speak about the different experiences and different things happening to women in detention. But as the event is called Accelerate Action, would you like to share any action that people can take, whether it's the government, whether it's individuals or organizations, that they can do to support refugee women? I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Sophie, you're up already.
Sure. Well, I would second Agnes's point that it is really important to write to your MP to tell them that you do not want detention, that you do not support this hostility towards refugees that successive politicians have been pushing. JRS has a report about detention relatively recently that you can share with your MP. I know that Women for Refugee Women have some excellent ones as well. But you know, to share and explain what this does to people. So I think that's a really important a really important starting point. Yeah, I'll let someone else go.
Agnes, would you like to go next?
Regarding detention, we suggest to let people live in the community, because when you go through the research of women for refugee women, most of the women that were detained are released in the community. So why you spend a lot of money putting them in detention when you know that you will release them, and maybe it will take time to grant them the refugee status, but at least they can be in their community, have people around them, try to fit in the society, starting to get some education and bring the skills that they have to the society that acknowledge them. So what I will suggest.
Great, thank you so much. Reem, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. I second everything that Sophie and Agnes said, and I'd like to add something for every one of us to do is strike a conversation with people around you. You know, try to challenge the narrative, try to change that from your smallest circle, and let the ripple effect, do their work. And also try to find women with lived experience of detention or asylum seeking in your community. Speak to them, you know, get to know them on a human level, see how you can support them, but also build your knowledge base based on their experiences. So yeah, that's from me.
Don't know if you'd like to add anything else, Meryl.
And well, of course, I'm not a campaigner, I'm a writer, but I guess what I would say from my experience is Agnes mentioned at the top of her talk that finding out this has been going on for 80 years can be quite depressing, but it also gives you the tools to call bullshit. It gives you the tools that when people start saying, oh, well, it's different now, or oh, it's an emergency, why are all these boats coming? You can very calmly explain that this is not an emergency. This is an ongoing policy to dehumanize people who are in need. And you can, yeah. So I guess that's what I would say. Follow the instructions of the ladies who do all the campaigning as to who to write to. But when you get some mealy-mouthed reply, you can just call bullshit on it.
Great, thank you so much. We're running out of time, so I'll go for one more question, and if you can keep your answers quite brief, that would be great. We have someone saying, thank you so much for all sharing your experiences and work. What do you believe are the most immediate changes needed in detention centres to support mental health? So I'll start with Agnes, maybe. You are on mute, Agnes.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Yes. So what do you believe are the most immediate changes needed in detention centres to support mental health?
I don't know because my experience was that even people who are in the detention centers, that they said that they should help the women in, they don't do it. Even when you are sick and you go to see the doctor thinks that you want to get out from the detention center. It's only the charity around that can raise their voice and speak out that detention is not good, let people out, is what I think, according my experience. Because I'm in detention, I will cry, and when you let me, I'm still there crying. I cannot sleep. So I don't know, really, according my experience, for me, let people out, or the organizations that are not involved in the process, that are befriending with women there, can help them. In some detention, they don't allow visits. Even to visit people isn't allowed. I don't know, but it's my fault, is what I think.
No, thank you so much, Agnes. But Reem, what about you? I'm assuming you'll have some interesting thoughts of this as well.
Yeah, I would start with prioritizing support over, you know, laws and rules and what have you. And train, very, very important, train everyone that is outward facing when it comes to providing services to be able to provide trauma-informed services, you know. So they come, you know, they sit at their desk, talk to people, approaching them as human beings with care rather than, you know, just another number, just another, you know, someone on my to-do list today. I'd start there, but ultimately, as Agnes said, you know, we hope to really end detention altogether, co-create solutions with those with lived experience, you know, and move towards a community-based approach.
Great, thank you. And Sophie, just quickly, if you have anything about mental health for women in destitution as well.
Well, like both destitution and detention are inherently bad for mental health. So what you really need to do is end them. I would think one thing that we could do is if we ended in the hostile environment that puts immigration control across a lot of different areas of life, it would be easier for people to access support when they needed it. Can I also just add with detention, but of course we need to end it because it's bad for mental health, and like any detention is bad for mental health. Long and indefinite detention are even more so. So a short time limit on detention would also maybe help. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So thank you for all of you for speaking. I'll pass over to our Executive Director, Mia, just to make some closing comments.
Thank you, Wotia, and thank you to a really fantastic panel. Agnes and Reem and Meryl sharing your personal stories, whether it's your mother's or your own, and the stories in the voices of all the other women that are currently in immigration detention was really powerful. Reem, person before policy. I think that is the message of this evening. You know, the phrase human rights is made up of two words, and probably the most important word in that phrase is human. So yes, we have to challenge narrative and policies. We have to reach out and show solidarity. But ultimately, at the end of the day, remember that we're talking about women, young women, older women, women who have experienced trauma, and women who have come to the UK to seek safety and refuge. Again, thank you very much for sharing your stories and setting the context as well, Sophie. You know, I was going to say thank you, but on the other hand, having read the report already many times and hearing you again, it's quite disheartening and quite saddening to know that this is the reality of women in the UK today, regardless of their of where they come from. So we can do something about it. We have to do something. This International Women's Day is about accelerating action. Write to your MP. You heard it from all of our panel speakers. We will share René Cassin in a follow-up email. We will share both the reports that Sophie mentioned and Agnes, Women for Refugee Women. We will share useful templates. Follow René Cassin because we usually showcase all of the actions and messages coming from Women from Refugee Women and other organizations working on the issue. We also run our own other excellent events. I'm just putting two in the chat today. Our next event is next week on the art of debating, which is good not just for having responsible conversations and arguments, but for negotiation. And later this month, we will hear an expert talk about torture and international law as part of our international law series. Finally, become a supporter of René Cassin. Any donation, whether it's small or large, regular or one-off, enables us to put together such excellent events like tonight, bringing together the experts by experience. We are just facilitators, but it's the work of Meryl and Agnes and Sophie and Rin that really gives meaning to women's rights and therefore human rights. I also like to thank Wotia for putting together this excellent event this evening and to thank our participants. And I hope you have a good evening. Thank you very much.